In the meantime, we have some new reaction for you to the verdict of forgetful grandma Tracey Nix. Nix was acquitted of the crime of aggravated manslaughter in the hot car death of her infant granddaughter, Uriel.
We, the jury, find as follows as to count 1 of the charge. The defendant, Tracy Howard Nix, is not guilty. We, the jury, find as follows as to count 2 of the charge. The defendant, Tracy Howard Nix, is guilty of leaving a child in a motor vehicle in excess of 15 minutes, causing great bodily harm.
The jury found Nix guilty of a third-degree felony of leaving the child in the car for more than 15 minutes. The statutory max is typically 5 years for such a felony crime, but it could be possibly 8 in this case, depending upon what the judge finds regards to aggravating factors the state is trying to present. Now, during deliberations, the defense team proffered witnesses that could be called on appeal, including Dr. David Diamond, an expert on forgotten baby syndrome.
This is a peer-reviewed medical journal in which I described the medical basis of how it is that people can forget children in cars. And this specifically, I want to emphasize, this is for people who are not on medication. I understand that in this case, we have an issue about medication affecting Tracey Nix's memory, and that's certainly valid. But independent of medication, we have hundreds of people who have forgotten children in cars, and that is independent of medication impairing their memory. And this was a part of my publication in Medicine, Science, and the Law.
And guess what, my friends? Dr. David Diamond is joining us live right now. I want to welcome him into the program. Dr. David, thank you so much for your time this morning and for talking with us about this case. Your testimony yesterday got cut off with the verdict announcement, as you know. So I want to just back everything up and start with how the defense team wanted to call you as part of their case presentation at trial, but were unable to. And that's something we haven't really been able to dive into it at Court TV. Could you tell us what happened there? Why did the judge prohibit them from calling you?
Well, first, thank you for inviting me to be on your show. It has surprised me when judges have refused to have experts testify. Not only was I not allowed to testify and speak to the jury, but the experts, the toxicologists, weren't able to address the medications that she was on. So there was no explanation that I was given as to why no one was permitted, no experts were permitted to testify in this case.
That's really baffling, Dr. David, as you noted. We're baffled by it, and we want to know what your opinion is. You, correct me if I'm wrong, but you personally evaluated Tracey Nix, is our understanding, and came to an opinion as to how the situation could have occurred with baby Uri. Would you share that, please?
So not only with Tracey Nix, I've spoken with dozens of parents, grandparents, caretakers who have lost children as a result of being forgotten in cars. Every single case is a tragedy, and it's just horrifying when you think about this. And in Tracey's case, it was so similar to the dozens of other cases. I mean, here's a good person, a person who all her life has cared about people. She had been asked by her daughter to watch her granddaughter, Uri, picked her up from her daughter, took her granddaughter out to lunch, and left lunch. On her way home, and this is the pattern, on her way home, she lost awareness of her granddaughter in the back. And understand, what we've got now are children that are out of view, that are quiet. She was behind the driver. There was nothing of Uri's in the car that she could see. And so as she came home, she had lost awareness that Uri was in the car. And so she exited her car, went about her daily activities. And during that day, Uri died of heat stroke in the car.
It is horrifying, as you said, Dr. David. I want to ask for some clarification on one point. Many of us have been wondering, is Tracey Nix suffering from any kind of cognitive declining that could have contributed to this or been the cause of this?
Well, first, as I emphasized in court, what happened with Tracey Nix, which was to lose awareness, to forget you're in the car. People have called this forgotten baby syndrome, and that's not a medical term. We forget to do things that we plan in the future all the time. Later in the day, you could be planning to call someone. You're planning to stop at the store on the way home, and you forget. That happens to completely normal people. We don't know, actually, on that particular day, was it because of the medication she was taking? So she was on an extremely high dose of Ambien, which is known to impair memory. She was also taking up benzodiazepine, which impairs memory. And the experts testified that she should not have been on such high doses of medication, each of which would be known to impair memory. So the way I testified was she could have forgotten Yuri even in the absence of medication. But the medication certainly exacerbated the situation, and potentially there was a synergy between the various different medications she was taking that could have contributed to her memory impairment.
This is fascinating, Dr. David. So I suppose the best way to sum this up, and correct me if I'm wrong, I get that you're saying it's a loss of awareness that she experienced, and that is for sure. And you're saying that it's also possible that her taking those medications, Ambien and the benzodiazepines, could have also exacerbated that lack of awareness and made it even worse. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's correct. But understand something. I've been involved in dozens of cases. I've testified in numerous cases around the country. Most of the time, people are not on medication that affects memory. And so it is a potential factor in this case. But we need to understand hundreds of children have died as a result of being forgotten in hot cars. Probably about 800 children ever since we've had airbags developed in the 1990s, with children being put in the back seat, especially when they're put in and facing the rear. And this is what I've studied. The question is, how does the brain sort of lose awareness? How does the brain process information and yet then lose that awareness that there's a child in the car? So in this particular case, we don't know about the selective contribution of the medication. It could have happened in the absence of the medication. And I also want to clarify, I spoke to Tracey Nix for quite a while, as well as the other experts. There's no evidence that she has any form of dementia, Alzheimer's disease. This is not about brain damage. This is about a normal brain process, which ultimately results in tragedy.
This is really helpful, Dr. Diamond. Doctor, in the course of your evaluation with Tracey Nix, were you made aware of her being let go from her principal position because of forgetfulness?
I was aware of her past events, and actually she had some concerns about her forgetfulness. And this is the way everyone looks at it. No matter how forgetful a person can be, we put the value of a child's life so high that no one can imagine forgetting a child. It doesn't matter how forgetful you are. She had been concerned about her forgetfulness, which, as it turned out, was clearly caused by the medication. When she got off of her medication, that forgetfulness pretty much resolved. I found her to be entirely lucid, to be articulate, to be completely normal, and she had great memory of her experiences. So yes, I was aware of this, but I don't think it's particularly relevant when you're trying to think about, well, should you blame her because she knew she had some memory problems? What I find it's universal is that people become complacent. The idea that you can forget a child in a car is something that is so foreign to people that they say you can forget someone's name, you can forget where you left your keys, but you just don't forget a child in a car. And for that reason, that's why people don't take any measures to be certain that they do have awareness of the child in the car.
This is fascinating, Dr. David. I could talk to you all day about this. I'm curious, for anybody at home wondering, gosh, could that be me? Could I lose awareness in my car with my child? What advice do you have for anyone watching this program who doesn't want to be in this awful situation that Tracey Nix is in?
Well, understand, fortunately, it is an extremely rare circumstance. Most people who don't take any measures will not leave children in a car to die. The statistics actually are quite disconcerting, that about 25% of parents do actually report that during some drive, they do actually lose awareness of their child in the car. It does happen quite often. But fortunately, children are usually saved. Either the child makes a sound, the driver has to get something out of the back seat, or is just simply not warm enough for the child to die of heat stroke. So we need to be aware that this actually does happen quite often. Now, I helped to get a federal bill passed, which is the Hot Cars Act, and all new cars eventually will have to have child detection technology. And I think that's a great advantage.
Oh, it sure
But
is.
for now, what I urge people to do is that they should give themselves a cue to remind themselves that there's a child in the car. And it's real simple. Put something in the car seat when the child's not there, such as just a little stuffed animal. When you put the child in the car seat, take that stuffed animal out and put it in the front in full view. That way, when you see that stuffed animal in the front, that is a cue to you to remind you that your child is in the car. Now, I know many people will respond to that with skepticism, and they'll say, other people forget their children in a car. I could never do that. And that's what makes someone so vulnerable, because they feel that it's only the bad parents, the forgetful, the negligent parents that forget children. And I have seen the suffering that has happened to really wonderful people who just believed it never could have happened to them.
This is such great advice and insight, and I think the perfect note to end on. You started our conversation, Dr. David, by noting that Tracey Nix is a wonderful person who adored her children, her grandchildren, loved them, beyond measure, and this was just an awfully tragic incident. What good did you get from her? Because, of course, it's easy for all of us to look at her in the defendant's chair and think, my gosh, how could this woman do this? What did you glean from the conversation that made you say that she's a wonderful individual?
Well, whenever I get involved in a case in which a child dies, I look at the medical records. I look at what people say about the defendant. So I look into their past. I look at what the family says about her. Does she have any record of abuse or negligence? And there have been times when I have refused to testify. I've had cases in which the parent was on illegal drugs. And so you do question the character of people, and I need to question the character of someone before I would testify on their behalf. In this case, there just were so many people that thought the world of Tracey Nix, that she cared so much about people in general. And in my talking with her, I saw what a good person she is. And so that helped to motivate me to want to come to her defense and to explain how the brain processes information at different levels, at a conscious level and a subconscious level. And so we haven't talked about it much, but in these cases, when someone is doing something out of habit, and understand, she had driven home hundreds of times without the child. And that's the habit that we get into. We don't realize that in order to remember the child, we have to break that habit and have that awareness that on today's drive, there is a child in the back seat. And that's where we suffer. When we go through this habit memory that doesn't include the child, that's when we're vulnerable to losing awareness of the child. And more than half of the time when these children die, it's actually at their home or the home of the caretaker.
It's just horrific. You've shared such valuable insight with us today. Dr. David Diamond, thank you for your time and your expertise. Hope to talk with you again sometime.
Thank you for inviting me.